afternoon, and thank you for joining us here again for another installment of ABC. On today's topic, we're talking about work from home. And, what does that really mean? That whole coming through the pandemic, and we had that opportunity where organizations were able to function. And then now we're forced to come back out and people are sitting in traffic, and it seems to be a very topical thing today. So, with that in mind, I wanted to get perspectives, kind of going around the room in terms of what you think with work from home. So, Alana, I'll start with you in terms of your thoughts on it.
Sure, thanks so much. Well, I mean, like with everyone else, before the pandemic, I was working full on in the office, 12-hour days plus. Now I work from home completely.
Oh, okay.
So during COVID, we had to work from home, but I realized very quickly, maybe halfway through, that I wanted to work differently. So I actually approached my organization and said, look, could we talk about this? So I actually now have an arrangement where I work totally from home virtually, and I love it. And I can't see myself going back. But for me, it works. I think personality-wise, that's something we need to be conscious of. I think because of my personality, it works for me. It doesn't work for everyone. The work that I do as well, it works for me. I'm in HR. And I also support my company globally.
Right.
So because of time zones, etc., it makes sense. So I actually enjoy it. And I also, very importantly, I have a dedicated workspace at home where I work. It's my office, and that's all that goes on in that room. It was my old TV room that I commandeered, and now that is my workspace. So when I'm in there, it's about work. So I love it.
But then you're begging of me to kind of poke holes at.
Sure.
So is it that that's an arrangement that you have, or is it like the official company policy?
The company policy allows for flexibility.
Okay.
But you need to have your arrangement set up. So some departments where it works, there's rotations.
I got it.
Some people, if it's hands-on, I mean, you're there on the site, you have to be there hands-on. But for employees to put their hands up and apply, as I did, and have that discussion, then if it works for everybody, it's an arrangement that could be put in place. So there is a policy for flexibility.
Okay. So I'll come back to that in a little bit in terms of how do you know if it works, right? And being able to measure that.
Yes.
So Melissa, any opening thoughts on it?
So I've actually been working from home for 4 years. So This is pre-pandemic. I've always been working from home, as well as my team members. And it helps that my team members don't need somebody huddling over them all the time. So they work very well independently. They choose when they want to come in the office or if they want to stay home. And either way, the work gets done efficiently. So why mess with that system? It works for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maria?
Complete opposite. So actually, we started doing work from home before the pandemic. It was always, at EY, it was always part of what I would call a benefit. I actually had it for at least 3 to 5 years before.
Okay.
I had one staff, she was going to Dubai, so I said, don't leave the job, work from home. She worked from home for 3 years. But I also had mothers, lots of mothers in my group, a lot of women. So we always had flexible work arrangements. Then the pandemic came, and I could tell you though, the rest of the firm was not for it.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Nobody wanted them work from home. Everybody wanted to see them in the office. And then the pandemic came, and everything switched. And actually, the ones who didn't want them work from home, I haven't seen them come out in full as yet. So it changed people thinking that you have to have, people in front of you to get things done. That being said, however, our policy is 2 days off, 3 days on. That's the standard policy. And if you want more, you have to apply for it. But I could tell you, our environment is apprenticeship. People are there to learn. And I'm sorry, it's what you want to get out of life, right? So, when you're working, it's also building relationships. I tell my young people it's about, life lessons. It's not just about a job. And I don't think I can do that if I have a team working from home. So we have debates, technical debates, we have life debates, and it's a very family-oriented department. So I can't see that. And they come out. They want to come out. They want to come to work. And for me, I come to work every single day.
Right. Okay.
I like to put on my clothes and go to work.
So you didn't have any issues from, transition from the pandemic and then back out to work?
No, I love it. I like getting up early, putting on my clothes, go earlier than the traffic, so you're not in traffic, and then when the day is done, the day is done. I actually found in the pandemic there was no beginning and no end.
Right. Yes.
So,
That is
Yeah.
you know,
You have to build it
Real.
yourself.
yeah,
Yep,
you
yep,
roll
yep,
off your
yep,
bed. If
Yeah.
you feel to take your shower at 2 o'clock, then you
Yeah.
take it. You're
Structure.
working non-stop.
Yeah.
8 o'clock in the night, I forget to watch. So your life
Yeah.
just morphed.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So there are pros and cons. I also think where young people are involved and you want to teach them to be leaders. If we take these young people and it's only themselves, how do they be, learn to manage and to lead? So I think that's the big difference I have to it.
Bruv?
Yeah. So, I mean, remote work is not a new concept, right? Work from home is not a new concept. For us, for our business, we actually had a work from home policy as far back as 2013. Right? We actually had an official policy where we allow people to select days during the week and they can actually work remotely. But that, I think, is because of the kind of work that we do. Now, even if I think back to my corporate days, I mean, 15 plus years ago, we also
You're
had...
dating yourself, huh?
Yeah, I know. I mean, no shame. Yeah, I can't hide from that anyway, right? But the reality is that even in the corporate world, right? They see your laptop. I worked in a company that had geographically spread offices, and so we had to go to those offices, and I would have had at least been able to log in remotely, connect to the servers,
So there's always a
etc.
version
So I would
of
still
it.
be able to do remote work, but it was still standard practice that you would come to the office, right?
Right.
And that would be considered work, right? But where our business, given the work that we do, marketing, communication, advertising, digital marketing, etc., I think by virtue of that, we can operate anywhere, pretty much anywhere in the world, right? And so that's what sort of prompted, and as we started mirroring global companies and some of the practices that they had, it was very easy for us to implement, as far back as 2013, as I said, some type of work from home policy. And that, I think, is important because, to me, the real critical success factors for remote work or work from home,
Right.
it more or less condensed into like three things in my mind, right? Procedure and policy, so ensuring that you have the appropriate policies in place so that you can in fact track, mitigate, ensure that work is done, etc., etc. Not that we don't trust people, but at the end of the day, you still need to ensure that the work is done, right? And so if you're deliverable driven or what have you, then it's fine. You don't need to be over folks to get work done. In addition to which, technology is a key piece, right? Ensuring that the staff and the team members have the appropriate tools to get the work done.
Correct.
The
So-
systems and checks and balances are in place with the appropriate tools to do it remotely, check in work, etc., etc. We've come a long way, and there's technology that actually allows that to be very, very, very easy. And I think the third thing to me is the culture, right? Because you can put a work from home policy in place, but if the mindset or the culture of the people is one where, well, I'm gonna just go to the beach, or I using this work from home to do something else other than work, then the reality is that you're gonna run into problems. You're gonna always have, hey, well, you're working from home, but you didn't actually do the work, or why are you falling behind, or you're allowing distractions from home or wherever you are to now, affect productivity.
Life happens,
Yeah.
So to your point, when it becomes a little blurred and life just happening at you. So funny story, when Chike and Brevard started Caribbean Ideas in 2007,
Yeah.
I would have been their first employee. And back then, fresh out of UE-ish, they were...
I like ish.
They telling me work from home. Well, I win the lottery. So you give me a laptop and work, and there were no checks and balances as he's talking about. It was still new. And then I had to battle. I remember then telling my dad, oh yeah, well, I have this job and working for... What?
Well, that generation.
Yeah,
That generation. Forget
4
it.
months into the
concept.
thing.
Yeah, that
You ain't leave
concept.
the house yet.
Daddy telling me, big man, here what's going on? You need to go and get a real job.
Oh, you're still in
Or
your
find
pajamas
somewhere- or
and
find
you're
somewhere to
looking
live.
for you and where-
Yeah,
Correct.
that wasn't work. So fast forward to today's environment and today's world, to Brevard's point, it needs a whole ecosystem really to support it. And Maria, I see what you're saying too from the perspective of young people in particular. and creating that environment for them to thrive and nurture also. But then Melissa, on the flip side, I'm wondering that you would have done that for 4 years, but you have a fairly young team, right?
Correct.
So how do you ensure that it works and juxtapose that against what Maria is saying?
So my team is sociable. We're in entertainment, right? So we're sociable by any means, right? We have to be. So when we have events, we would probably do the 3-2,
Right.
and come out certain
Got it.
days
Yeah.
because we are like, okay, we have to pull things together. We have to make sure we have, these things ready to go for the event, da 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 da. So we will come out for those types of things. If we have new workers, like when we're assigned OJTs, for example,
Right.
the OJTs, I make it mandatory for them to work at least the first 3 months
I do the
in
same
the
thing.
office
Got it.
Yeah.
with
Got it.
everybody.
I do the same thing.
And then with that, I roster the officers 1 in, 1 out so that they always have somebody
There.
overlooking and being there to answer their questions. So the staff still gets rostered, some home, some here,
Right.
and you go like that. So that system works. The OJT now is with her laptop and she's like, okay, so when do I get to work from home? I'm like, not yet, darling. You have to earn that.
Yes, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
You're here to learn, so somebody has to be here, and we
Yeah.
need to see you doing what you do, right? Because I don't know if you work well independently on your own. So that's something I have to figure out in terms of the specific employee, right? So, I mean, that works.
So
But it's
Sorry.
also something to manage there, right? So, we were having some discussions in the office talking about the whole work from home, etc. And, one of the partners was saying, well, this member of staff don't want to come out at all. They just want to work from home 100%. And we're saying, well, no, you need to be there some of the time. But it has come now where, as you said, kind of earn it. It's now become an entitlement. So there's a whole debate about, is it an entitlement? Is it a benefit? What is the story we want to give people about what this work from home, really is about?
I think it helps with retention, because what's happening as well with part of the Great Resignation is that people want choice.
And I think that's it.
People want
It's
choice,
having choice.
right? So then
Yeah.
if companies can't give that choice,
Yeah.
people will leave and go where they can choose how they want to work.
I think you're spot on. It's people having the ability to say, just knowing you have that flexibility. So there's this whole movement, actually, EY in the US does it, where you have no set vacation time.
Oh,
So
really?
you're not entitled to 15 days or 20 days. You can take vacation as much as you want. And the science have shown that people actually take less than when they had a set amount of days.
That would
I
probably
trying to
be
wrap-
me.
But
That would be
there's a
me.
but, there's a but though. There's a but, you have to deliver.
If that one person comes and says,
So then
yeah,
it talks about really strong performance management
Yes.
systems
Yes.
that really fit with the organization. But
Yes.
let's bring it in a local context. Come on, it's Trinidadians, you
you know,
know?
people say that.
And
There's-
I ask him, there's the private sector approach, and then
Yeah.
of course, I think the public sector is probably the largest employer here. Would something like that, for example, work in the public sector?
I don't feel so.
It works for me.
It does, right? Okay.
It works for me. And this is not only for my company. We have a very weird structure. So I don't know if to say company or departments.
Right.
For the sake of clarity, I'll say departments,
Okay.
right? So it works for my department and all the other departments. We have 1, 2, 3 others in the company. It works perfectly for them. They do the same thing. They just roster 1 in, 1 out. Whoever's there, because at the end of the day, we can work entirely remote. Like, we don't need to be there unless you need to see our face.
Okay.
And of course, we come for events and different things that we have to do. It works. I mean, even remote work now, I know we're using work from home, remote work interchangeably, but as 2 different things, right?
Clarify.
So you have work from home, which is literally you're working from home, your couch or the office that you've designated, commandeered in your house. There's that. Then there's remote work where you are working remotely in some other country
Wherever
for
in the
a
world.
company.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Wherever
yes.
in the world. And then there's digital nomads, which is a whole other thing, where it is you're traveling around the world, working usually as entrepreneurs or working for yourself in whatever case. and you're doing the same thing, working for a number of companies around the world as a digital nomad. So just to distinguish, there's a difference between
Yeah.
the remote
Yeah.
work and
Okay.
work from home.
Yeah, something you touched on earlier, I think in terms of the onboarding, and it's important even if we're dealing with a hybrid scenario, it's still important to actually have that onboarding, I think, in person
Yes.
because
Agreed.
the
Yeah.
dissemination and permeating of the culture
Correct.
really happens more in person. It's somewhat difficult to actually do that digitally, to be fair. But it's probably better to actually do that in person because, and to your point, if first 3 months come in, you get to know your team members, get to know the culture, the way of the organization, etc. I think that part is important. And then thereafter, of course, you're obviously backed by a proper policy and system, then you can actually go ahead and do, remote work.
But even as you're saying policy and systems, I hear a lot of persons saying, well, the companies don't allow remote, now I'm saying remote work.
Yeah.
They don't allow work from home because they don't have the infrastructure or whatever in place. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, do they have a laptop? Do they have a cell phone?
Yeah.
Okay, what's stopping them? Well, we don't have tracking software, and we don't have this, and we don't have tracking software.
Yeah.
You just give deliverables, and they know what they're supposed to do at the end of every day. Or even if it is you have regular staff meetings, as in a check-in, half
Yeah.
an hour. Okay,
Yeah.
a pecha kucha style. Okay, what do we have to do this week? All right, cool.
Yeah.
Everybody know what they has to do.
I think
Then
when you have
why do
a
you need
real
check-in?
deliverable
You know?
environment, it's easy to do.
Yeah.
Right? So we deliver reports to clients.
Right.
We have something tangible that you call a deliverable.
Correct.
So it's
Right.
a lot easier to work from home that way. I used to tell them before, I don't care when you do it, how you
Yeah.
do it.
Just get it done.
Just get it
Get it
done.
done.
Yeah.
Here's the date, deliver on that
That's right.
date.
I
Yep.
agree.
But when you have something where, somebody's like, you don't see the deliverables. So if somebody's supposed to be doing something, tracking something, and one day you ask, well, where is this? And it's not there. So it all depends on your job.
But I think a lot of leaders kind of blame low productivity on working from home or remote work. They're like, oh, we don't want to do that because people don't work as hard. I'm like, well, what about performance management? Where does that come in and the
I think that's it.
deliverables?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think
Exactly.
it's
Yeah,
about
yeah.
Proper
management
system.
and learning to manage in that virtual environment
Correct.
as opposed to blaming low productivity on that.
And
I think we have to evolve a bit.
dependent on the individual, some people would actually say that they're more productive
Yes.
working
Yeah.
remotely, right? Because
Yeah.
you don't have the distraction, you don't have folks interrupting you every so often with certain requests, etc.
Yep.
So it really depends on the individual, but also to your point on the deliverable, right? And your own systems for measuring that, because obviously it's not going to work on an assembly line or let's say
Yeah.
manufacturing scenario or where
Technical
your
space.
input,
Yes.
your output is an input for someone else, so therefore they're waiting. So it's very difficult for that to happen. But if it's an intangible product, a digital product, and we'll say it's intellectual property or other aspects where there's mental work involved, like those things are easier to actually be done remotely and just contribute to the overall deliverable and measured, right? Because like billable hours, I think is a concept that most firms operate with, and that can be tracked remotely. That can be measured, and at the end, when you're doing your performance, there's the actual deliverable, and then there's the time that you put in, and those are measurable
Yes.
against your performance.
But then, Brad, I want to address the big pink elephant in the room, right? So, you know,
Want me to say white elephant?
I call it pink. I call it pink. there are two pink drinks.
Big drinks, the drinks there.
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
you
Yeah,
go.
there we go.
Yeah,
So we go back to the white elephant, right?
Let's stick with the white
But there have been comments nationally saying that work from home cannot work. Dare I say, what exactly was it? They said, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of we don't have the it's not I'm trying to remember the exact wording of it, but pretty much the people aren't capable of it. And there are different school of thoughts on it. Some people for and against. And then looking at it from the employee perspective, I see it all the time on social media. Why I have to be sitting down in this traffic? And
Agreed.
after for 2 years, people not engaging in traffic, your tolerance for it would fall. And then you now have to sit down, especially if you're coming from south or into Port of Spain and you're there 5 o'clock, you're leaving home to get to work for 8 o'clock, and then you're expected to function whereas you for 2 years you were rolling off your bed at 7:45, and you cool. What would you say to something like that? Is there some credibility from a public sector perspective with it, or is there a way that we could help it work in that
I
context?
actually feel, without any scientific research here, but I would tell you, whoever is non-productive in the office is non-productive at home.
Yes.
And whoever is productive in the office, I bet I've seen it with my own stuff. We don't have issues with that. They are just as productive home.
So there's a consistent thread.
So yeah, it's not about where you put the person, it's about who you hire and their own ethics. So you could put them in any environment and they will work well. And you have some people, you put them in the same exact environment and they're still not working.
Right.
So it's how self-motivated your people are. I think that's the reality of it.
I think it also comes back to her statement of performance management, because the managers weren't necessarily taught how to deal with that when it comes to work from home,
Yeah.
right? So in an environment like that, it's like, I need to see you.
Yeah.
That's so
I
old
need
school,
to see
though,
you. I need to be able to hover over you and shout across the office, hey, Melissa, come for this. Or come, let we talk about that. So there's that element of it as well, which I've seen with some workers in the office, not mine, but some workers in the office. They're like, no, I need to be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if you distill it down to the performance and the deliverable, 8 hours in office, seeing you, over you, and your output is X. But let's just say, you work X number of hours at home, but your output is 2X. Well, what is it your trade-off, right? Wouldn't you prefer to actually have double the productivity and not necessarily have to have the person in person, right?
Do you think they measured it in the public sector?
Well, you see, I think in some scenarios, and that's why I think part of the statement may have been infrastructure, right? Because we're on a thrust right now for digital transformation. But in some instances, depending on the department that you're referencing, a lot of it is, paper, files, etc., that are in a physical location. And so it's difficult to actually do some of that remote work to try to access those files remotely. But now that you actually have that digital transformation, there are scenarios where, fine, do you need this particular clerk to actually be there?
Yeah.
Because you can actually do everything online.
Yeah.
Right?
And we function online. I say function
We did.
loosely for
We
2
did,
years,
yes, we
but
did.
for the most
But
part, we
don't you
function.
think some of it, though, is finding relevance for yourself as a manager? Because if I had to spend my whole day checking what other people were doing, then I would not get anything done.
Correct.
True.
So if
True,
you
that
didn't-
takes time
If you didn't
and
have that
effort.
job to just watch what you're
Yeah.
doing, the question is maybe they don't know what they're supposed to be doing otherwise. So maybe they are the unproductive ones who don't want to encourage work from home because they have nothing else to do but to stand over somebody and ask them what were they doing.
And
all day.
micromanage is so much work.
So then are the managers and supervisors, are they properly trained? Are they properly trained and have
Probably
the
not.
systems in
Probably
place
not.
in terms of really how to manage, how to supervise, and how to judge output as opposed to activity?
Yeah.
So I think that question really arises.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And I think now, as I mentioned, there is a transition in terms of the type of management that you need.
Exactly.
Because if we're going more hybrid, and I doubt we will ever go back to full on,
Yeah,
so it
we
will
would.
be hybrid, then that's a different skill.
A whole
for
different skill
managers,
set.
how to deal with that. I have remote staff, and is a different way. I even build in time because I don't ever see them face to face. I build in time for, water cooler talk, social talk. I actually lengthen our meetings so that we have some of
Serious?
that.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You're building informality because otherwise, you need to nurture that relationship because it's different.
Very
face to
different.
face.
Quite true.
And it takes a whole lot of, let me say that differently. It takes a different kind of energy
It does.
and effort, even for you at the management level, to drive that engagement.
And trust.
And trust.
Oh,
yeah.
and
Which you have
trust.
mentioned that
But
earlier.
that's
right?
the other elephant. That's the other, white elephant.
Yeah,
A lot
let's-
of it is trust, but it then goes to the philosophy then that this could add to is you're actually going to build leaders versus managers.
There we go.
Because it would be teaching people to be self-motivated. It would be teaching people to take accountability and responsibility without somebody telling you what to do. So a plus to that is I think we will move away from managers to really leaders, because to lead a team, to get people to be self-motivated, to want to deliver, to do all of that is very different to before, where people felt, okay, what are you doing today? What are you doing today? It changes kind of what the next generation might look at. And I do see it, huh? I mean, I have some very young people who I'm just seeing have so much more leadership qualities than the 10 years ago, people who would have been coming in from university. And it's this whole kind of self-starter, I'll be accountable for what I have to deliver.
Right.
I don't have to tell them, come on a Sunday. They meet for themselves.
Really?
Yeah. I don't have to tell them we need to get this done. It's just done. And every day I'm like, oh gosh, you'll just surprise me all the time. You know?
That's amazing hearing that, because so many times in conversations you hear a very different perspective about Gen Zs and millennials and whatnot.
Yeah.
And, you know, the sense of entitlement and wanting everything now.
Well, that doesn't change
No,
that.
of course. But you don't get the balance.
That doesn't change that.
The balance, the other side
Yeah.
of it.
Oh, but they're
Yeah.
they are, I mean, I'm surrounded by them and they have this, you know, different philosophies to us. But I would have to say that I see more leaders coming up.
That's interesting. I
than,
love that. Love
yeah,
that.
they're leaders. And if you want them to work, let them be in charge of themselves. If you try to dictate, forget that. They're going to get into this whole entitlement mode.
Right.
Right? But leave them to kind of
Yeah.
run their own show with guidance.
Yeah.
You see something completely different.
I think giving that level of accountability too helps, right? Because then again, to your point, you give them some opportunity for that accountability and therefore take ownership of yourself. And then ultimately, in theory, you are taking charge of your own destiny, but within parameters or guardrails.
You're your own boss.
Right?
Yeah.
And then they're motivated now to do that because of course it's ultimately up to them. Right? And you then don't have to micromanage or manage, like be that proverbial
Big stick.
traditional manager, if you will. And I think that's important because we need to shift from the busy work, which is what would typically need to be what people would measure in an office environment. Like you need to be in the office and you kind of need to make yourself look busy. Otherwise, well, you probably get cut or whatever. People like wondering, what are you really doing, right? So you busy work, and busy work is not productive. It doesn't necessarily lead to the result or the output, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why measuring the actual output is important. And I think given that accountability, particularly with the millennials and Gen Zs, like I think that piece is important and will obviously be something that going for the future.
So Alana, to get a little bit specific based on what Brevard is saying, right? Measuring the output. So you were talking earlier about the performance management systems and whatnot. Are there specific performance management systems suited to hybrid work, or is it hybrid, work from home, remote work, all the iterations of it, or is it that it's just one specific cut and paste format we should be using?
No, real good question. I mean, performance management systems on the whole, there's a continuum. And even that is changing. And that's a whole art and science in itself. From some companies doing away with the traditional and having more check-ins and conversations. But it also depends on the culture of the company itself. I think measuring performance virtually or remotely has to be a little different. You have to look at your deliverables. You have to, and then also having more, I guess, contact with more check-ins. So you kind of see how the progress is being made, as opposed to the old-time kind of tick box. But in the any day, performance management will make it work, but your managers, your leaders need to be trained to do it properly. And again, it reflects the culture of the company. Because if that culture, if there's a lot of, there's not a lot of trust, that erodes your system. So bottom line, I mean, long story short, there's no cut and paste for performance management. It is culture based. And I think But people have to break it down too. It's a conversation between two people.
Right.
And they-
Agreed. It's
right?
not. It's not a technology.
It's not punitive. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a conversation between two people. And once you get it to that level and people relax into it and let it be real, I think there'll be a lot more value from it. And that would apply for virtual as well.
Okay. Melissa, you've seen that in terms of you managing your staff and that engagement and that 4 years,
Yeah.
4+ years.
So luckily for us, I haven't had a turnover of any staff in 4 years.
Really?
So yeah, really.
Wow.
So we've built that family environment, and then the culture to go with it is that I don't ever refer to them as my staff. I always say my team members in my emails,
Right.
even to
Very
my
good.
directors,
Yep.
everybody, they're my team members. And then I give them that ownership and responsibility that you were talking about. So from the time they came into the company, I was like, okay, I'm very good at analyzing people's strengths in terms of what they can do and their weaknesses in their deliverables. So my first conversation is, okay, how do you learn best?
Right.
And then they would communicate to me, okay, I need clear emails, or I need this, or I need that, or I need this. And I'm like, okay, I understand what you need. All right, this is what we have to do. Which of these projects do you think you want to take on and own? And then I make them the project managers of their own projects.
Yeah.
So they now have the responsibility of reporting and saying, this is what it is, this is what it is, doing the reports, doing everything, and making sure it line up. If your baby fails, then everybody know you're the project manager.
Yeah.
So
Goes
they
back
don't
to
want
the
that.
The accountability
Yeah.
They don't want
and
that.
trust.
And where the trainees come in now is like, okay, the trainees don't necessarily get to choose a project. We make them work on everything, but we give them subsets of each of the projects. And we're like, okay. And again, depending on their strengths. But then, of course, you want to build up those weak areas, right? So you have to
Yeah.
chuck inside of there
Yeah.
something that would make them uncomfortable and that they have to get over. So that's how I kind of build that up. And I will praise my team at every public function that I get.
Nice.
I'm like, God has blessed me. I do not have to micromanage anybody. They just do what they do. When I go on vacation, they shut me out of everything. They don't CC me. They're like, boss,
Take your vacation.
you need to not answer your emails,
Right.
okay? Leave it. I'm a workaholic. So I will always be 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm doing things, right? They will shut me out of everything.
Right.
Everything. And they're like, we have it under control. Don't worry. And I will come back
Trust.
and not have to worry about anything. There's no mountain of work waiting for me.
That's real good.
So
real good.
it works for me.
Yeah.
I have no complaints whatsoever.
Well, that's good. I mean,
Nice.
to build that in a virtual environment, I mean, that's really good. It means you're taking the extra time. It's not just about meetings for the deliverables. It's about spending time. I mean, as Alana said, it is, performance management. People think it's the technology. It's not the technology. I mean, I'm terrible
Still
with the
people.
technology. We have the greatest technology, but I am not the best, not from using it,
Right.
but taking the time to fill out the
Yes.
form and to do all this stuff. But I do ensure they get their smiley faces, they get great job, I love this email. I send that back all the time immediately. I try
I
my best to
agree.
do that.
But then like we were talking about it in a previous episode, sometimes doing that, the smiley faces and good jobs, sometimes people do it as a matter of course, as
Oh,
opposed
no.
to
My people
it
know
has
it.
to be authentic, right?
Because
Right,
believe
of
you
course.
me,
Yeah.
if not,
Yeah.
They know
Yeah.
if it's not
Yeah,
authentic.
Yeah,
Not
they,
like
they,
it's
they,
not.
they see that.
what is this?
Yeah. So when they hear good job, they know like, okay,
Yeah.
that don't dish out too easily, yeah?
Yeah.
My line is, we need to have a conversation.
I was like, oops.
But then people feel it too when
Right.
it's inauthentic.
Yes.
You get that vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, also one of the things with the work from home too is even though people work in separate, you still have to understand you're a team. So we had an instance, of course. So the young people, they're working right through, like if it's normal working hours to some extent, and they want to lock off by 5, 6 o'clock. But then you have the ones with families at home that they're locking off earlier, and then they're picking back up their computer at 10 o'clock in the night. And now you have the young people getting all these emails at 10 o'clock in the night. So I had to tell the older people, okay, come on, guys, this isn't fair because you can't expect them to answer an email at 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock because you up at that
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Right? So we have to learn with the flexibility that we have to be mindful of. Everybody's not on the same schedule anymore. Everybody isn't 8 to 5. Everybody isn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that uniformity.
So yeah, again, it's a conversation between the people. So you have to say, okay, guys, I know. I mean, I had one of my younger staff saying, you know, I'm getting anxiety. Now they all suffer from anxiety. My children, my children will kill me for saying that, right? But you know, they get.
No, it's actually
yeah,
It is
because
true.
it's a thing
while
that it's
she's
on the
sleeping,
rise.
she's thinking, beep, beep, beep. Am I supposed to be answering an email? And this is where the work from home has some negative because we stop having boundaries, right? I tell people now it's not work from home, it's not work-life balance, it's work-life blend.
Yes.
And when that happens, the boundaries go away. And then there's other issues that will come into play there.
But there are things I
Yeah.
want to talk about that because you mentioned it earlier and it triggered for me. So there are tools that I could, because for me, again, I support several time zones. So there's a tool in Outlook that you can send at the person's normal working hours.
Right.
Now you could opt not to use it, but I do, so nobody's getting an email. Because if I'm working, somebody on the other side of the world is whatever
Right.
time.
So you just
Yeah,
schedule
you
when it's
schedule
all
it.
I
true.
schedule it. So,
Yeah.
well, you know, the way it works, I mean, I guess they know the time frame. So I just,
Yeah.
when I click send, it will go at that time. So you're not messing with people's sleep, etc. And also setting up that anxiety that, oh gosh, an email is and I need to deal with it at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, right? But in addition to that, I think it's also, there's a bit of inclusivity there too, where you're thinking that, you know, you want to make sure your team doesn't feel out of sorts. You're not putting
Yes.
anybody in an uncomfortable situation that, oh, I need to answer that too. So I think use the tool, because there are electronic tools for that kind of thing, to kind of soften the blow. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the barrier or the blend, as you put it. So as I said, I work from home and I realized that you need to kind of have some cutoff point.
Yeah.
So like for me,
Oh,
my
boy.
drive used to
Yeah.
be my detox.
Yes.
Right? So my
Yeah.
commute
That's a
home,
great
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
my commute home was a detox. So now when I leave my ex-TV room into my living room, I'm thinking, okay, well, what is it? So I actually like meditate or do something, or I change. Even though I've had
Okay.
on yoga pants all day, and then I stop. I will change, I will meditate, and then I could start my evening. So I think it's important to be conscious about these things
Yeah.
and put a little barrier there to separate
That's a
it a
great,
bit.
great point. I don't think anybody takes the time to do that. To say, you know, how am I now
Transitioning.
going to transition from the
I
ex-TV room?
I actually set alarms. So I have an alarm set. It's lunchtime because I will forget to eat and I will just go straight through. I would set it's lunchtime, okay, end of work here.
Really?
And yeah, I would set I have a load of alarms on my phone. I just set alarm. And I was like, okay, the alarm went off, all right, time to stop. I need to do something else and then come back.
That's a lot of discipline.
Yeah.
I always remember.
I would never be that disciplined.
Yeah. my daughter, she for her school,
Yeah.
when she was in primary school, they actually made them wear the uniform
Yes.
during
Yes.
COVID and
Yes.
lockdown.
Yeah.
Because
yes. My daughters too.
they said to them, look, you have to mentally say to them, look, you're in school now versus you're in jammies
Yeah.
and you're online
Yep.
and the lulling and you know what I mean? So that structure, I think even for us, because I remember during the height of the pandemic, you'd be going through, or somebody would, I was guilty of doing it. I'll talk about me. I'd be going through somebody's calendar. Oh, look, there's a free space.
Exactly.
Yes.
Meeting.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you and you.
lunch hours till
Yeah, and then have a lunch. hour.
Exactly.
What was
Yeah,
that?
it's like
I
it's all
schedule
a blur.
lunch, by the way.
All of a blur.
I schedule
You block
lunch.
it.
I block
Exactly.
lunch.
Yeah.
I block lunch.
Yeah. Well, scroll, free space. Take it. Meeting. Oh, and you know, on the other side of it, you're like, wait, but I thought I had so time free, and then nope, it's taken, and you find your entire day
Yes. Back to back.
back to back, and then you're like, ah.
Yep.
And one of the things I think we're discovering now, and I'm talking about even from a personal space, is that I kind of battled through it for the pandemic, for the most part, held it together, and then now coming out post-pandemic world, still because we work from home 100% for the most part, except odd meetings here and there that we decide to come out, right? But then continuing that and the burnout associated with that,
Yeah.
it's mind blowing. So I never thought I would be saying, Maria, I think I'm starting to lean a little bit on your end of things in terms of having that structure and still having days that we come out, because it puts demarcations, it puts space, it helps with mental health. And maybe that's something that is probably underrepresented when talking about work from home. How is mental health of
Yes.
staff, and like you spoke to the anxiety. How is that represented, or is it just a silent monster that nobody's talking about?
It's different for everyone, and I think we all as individuals need to know what works for us as well, because some people love it, and they want, or some people love working from home like me, and there's some people who want to be in the office and don't want, and then some people want a little bit of both. But it does affect your personality if you don't find yourself in the right space. So for someone like me who actually works from home, I mean, I have remote support, but if there's somebody who is an extrovert in that role, it could be a problem, and then that will lead to some mental health or wellness issues. So I think we need to know ourselves, know where we fit in, seek help, and talk to people if it's an issue. But as organizations too, we need to be conscious of that and make sure we kind of provide the help for people that they need.
And I think during the pandemic, we also saw it a lot where people were burning out, but we were also wondering why, right? And when we really dug deep into it, we realized that it was a number of variables. It wasn't just, yes, there's the overlay of the pandemic and uncertainty, etc., but there were other factors. You mentioned even the technology, right? Things like notifications from applications or platforms. So people didn't necessarily realize that they could turn off those notifications and therefore save their inbox and save the anxiety of, I have to actually achieve inbox zero, you know, and clear my emails and respond to all of these things, right? And so letting people know that, okay, yes, you could adjust the platform, schedule your emails, etc., to the specific times, manage, not let the tool work for you. Don't let the tool operate and manage you.
Don't let own you.
Right? Because it's there for your help, right? It's really meant to help you in terms of your productivity, etc. But some people start getting, every time they get a ping, or sometimes, it's Pavlov's theory, right? Classical conditioning. You get a vibrate or a ping, and it's like, wait, should I check? Should I? And
that's like the Outlook sound when an email comes in.
You're like, wait, should I respond? And the reality is that we have been conditioned, even pre-pandemic, we've been conditioned to actually respond to these things.
Away.
So now when you're inundated with all of these requests, and now worse yet, if companies are using multiple channels. So one thing, it was just your email, but now we use WhatsApp, we use Slack, we use other channels, and we're trying to communicate across multiple. People then started saying, whoa, hold on. And it is important to safeguard your time, right? Safeguard your hours, work-life balance, whereas you could have physically left the office and say, okay, fine, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to wherever, and then you transition to home. There was none of that, right? So you had to actually block that time to actually make that work-life balance. And that would have contributed a lot to a lot of the mental health challenges with folks, because, you know, people were working till the night and they felt it was normal. And it's like, ultimately, yes, there was nothing else to do, right? During the pandemic, okay, fine, you couldn't go out anyway. So you work, and then you realize, well, okay, when am I going to end? And I think, you know, now as we are emerging from the pandemic, we're still going to adopt some of the practices, but I think we should still learn from that. And as we do the hybrid scenario, we don't lose some of the things that we've learned over the last couple of years.
Agreed.
Because it still has helped.
Actually, one tool I wanted to mention again, there's focus time, which I love. And that gets scheduled for me. But then
you use it, you know, I've never used it.
I use it.
Because
Because otherwise,
focus time during this.
because otherwise you get back-to-back meetings because people still put stuff. So, you know, there are tools available.
This is on the iPhone for WhatsApp, or this is on
This
Outlook?
is on Outlook.
Okay.
Outlook,
But most tools have it. Your phone have it. It's like, at the end of the day, disruptions eat away at your time. You might not think.
At you.
At the end of the day, you by the time you get, even if it's a 5-minute disruption, you have to now stop what you're doing.
And go to
by the time you attend to that and come back, it takes you easily 10 to 15 minutes just to get back to where you were. Right? So think about 5 interruptions, that's death by 1,000 cuts, you know.
But if you think of the pandemic though, and during that period, you had to we took multitasking
So
to
Such a
level,
level.
go another level.
especially with the restaurants and all the fast food was closed.
You're
I
crying.
remember
You-
having client meetings and I say, well, if you
Oh,
need
yeah.
anything, it's my pot cooking.
Yeah. Correct.
Like frying chicken, having Teams
Yep.
meeting,
Yep.
dealing with
Yeah.
the online
Yep,
school.
yep,
It was
yep.
like,
Yes.
okay, men are now getting a taste of the feedback.
Yeah.
Welcome to our
Yes.
world. All the guys in the office was like, oh, man.
Whoa, yeah.
That now became
this
the
is
norm.
what it was,
Oh
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, but it did
Welcome
make
to
us
our
more human. You know, you're able to see people's pets in the background,
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
We
Yeah.
had
cats
we
walking
had,
across.
Joining plenty meetings.
That's
we
right.
had this team meeting,
Yes.
and one of my staff, she has a toddler, right? So we're having a dead serious meeting, and she's dead serious, and the child is on top of her shoulder, pulling her hair, and she's having this perfectly normal, serious conversation.
I think you must be facing that.
And the rest of us, I was
You're
like,
like,
I'm going to post this on what work from home really means for a woman. And he
Yeah.
jumped in and she's like, yes, well, this is what we have to do.
And that is
Yeah,
reality.
yeah,
That was
well done.
Look,
Well
at, look
done.
at the BBC.
Oh my gosh, that was a
the,
classic.
when
Yeah.
the kids come in, and
Yeah.
I think it was the nanny or the mom skates in the room, and
That was
Correct.
during the pandemic, though.
No,
That was
it was the male versus female.
yeah.
The female did this
Yes.
and
Yeah.
carried on her conversation, and the male was the woman pulling it out.
Oh my gosh, but you know, it has softened a bit because we had,
Yeah.
I mean, so many stories of that during the pandemic. Now,
Yeah.
I think when you're working from home, there's less of that.
Yes, yes.
You
Yeah.
know,
there
so
is.
people kind of, you know, keep it a little bit more professional
Yeah.
now. No
Yeah.
more,
Other
no more
than
cats in
the
background.
weed whacker guy and the
Oh,
the
the
blower.
blower.
neighbor,
Oh,
or
yes.
the buying
Yes.
scrap iron
Yes.
guy, you know,
Yes.
yeah, he passing by.
Scrap iron guy.
Buying scrap iron, yeah, he passed.
Blowers
Wait,
are
oh
the
gosh.
ones
It's so funny, you
old
know,
battery man.
Yeah.
nobody leaf blowing. Oh my gosh, sometimes I'm thinking the entire neighborhood.
It's timed
is blowing.
perfectly.
No, this is
Timed
what I
perfectly.
said. You know,
Good morning
the
and
neighborhood
welcome
is
to the
full
meeting.
of
Ah.
people.
Yeah.
The blowers. I always said if I ever became prime minister, the first thing I'm banning is blowers between
Hours
7
to
and
set hours.
5. First thing I'm doing.
Oh, no doubt.
No, it's so true, and you know, like what I appreciate with it, sometimes you think that God, is me alone? Like,
No, it's
am
everybody.
I this? Am
It's
I?
everybody.
And like when you talk to people and you hear these stories, it's, oh, okay, this is not me alone. Like
It's
everybody's
everybody.
going
Yep.
through this, you know.
Yep.
But you know that's really the whole thing. So what I'm hearing generally, it's a hybrid approach. You know, we take the good from one side, the good from one side.
Yeah.
Trying to meld it together, figure out what the bad elements are, how we mitigate that risk inside there, and how we make it work, and then more importantly, build structure and systems around it to help it work. So I guess Brevard actually, everybody opening remarks ironically kind of talk to that
Yep.
in different ways, and that really helped it work. And I think the last point I'd touch on briefly is from a trade union perspective. Do we think our unions are forward thinking in that space? Because, so for example, for it to work in many organizations who are unionized, you need the buy-in of all the stakeholders. So we're talking about the people, we've spoken about the leadership, we're saying that the leadership matters and how people manage themselves, but I think there's a third element that we've been largely silent on from a union perspective. So I was just wondering if anyone has any thoughts in terms of how the unions approach it, and are they really forward thinking in that space, or have we seen signs of encouraging movements in that space?
Yeah. I worked in a unionized environment. I don't do right now, but from what I know about unions and from an HR perspective too, communication is important. Get them in early, keep them involved, listen to their input, consult, and kind of work with them from a partnership perspective. And I think that goes a very, very long way. I haven't been involved in terms of where they sit with it now, but I know communication. You
critical.
have to start there with unions.
Yeah, and I think it's for them to also understand to remain relevant, right? And I'll use that word relevant. They also have to understand the world is changing,
Yes.
right? The environment is changing, the economics is changing. So the way unions, there was a need for unions. What a union looks like now has to take a very different perspective, because you now have to ensure that your employees actually have jobs with the economic environment.
Yeah.
Right? And what is the best way to negotiate with remote working for people to have engagement, for people to get the training that they need to get? So I think the unions have to think about, okay, for us to remain relevant, does our business model, because it is a business
That's
model,
correct.
it's
That's
a
correct.
business, is our business model going to take unions in the future?
Yeah.
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 I think that evolution is important because I get the sense that the focus for unions is really on the numbers, right? Okay, obviously that's the bread and butter of the
Subscription
union.
model.
Subscription,
Yeah,
yeah,
true,
exactly.
true.
Subscription model, you have your numbers, you have your membership. But if you're not really necessary, because sometimes when you start talking about productivity, right?
Yes.
And again, all we've been talking about before in terms of the deliverable, checking the performance, the output, that's all focused on productivity, right?
Yeah.
So not necessarily the absolute numbers. And so if the focus continues to be only on the absolute number of people, we maintain membership and we want to make sure that our membership is X number and that's about it, but we're not necessarily thinking about the evolution and how our membership is actually working, the productivity levels, the tools that they use, etc., then to Maria's point, they're going to miss the opportunity to evolve, and there's going to be a lot of a challenge going forward.
Melissa, anything you want to add?
We don't work in a unionized environment, so I can't really speak to that. However, in terms of the ministry and the powers that be, I think there definitely needs to be a change of mindset because you're talking about digital transformation. They're speaking it, but not embracing it.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah,
agreed.
So,
Agreed.
so it's a bit of a push and pull
yeah.
kind of scenario there.
I also think that, again, when people think about digital transformation, from a union perspective, they almost immediately think replacement.
Job loss.
Yeah, exactly.
Job
loss.
Job loss or replacement.
Really?
Instead of
Rather
job
than
creation.
reskill.
Yeah.
Or even reskilling.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because even as you think about, okay, yes, again, going back to the finite membership and really just maintaining that, if you really think about, well, this digital transformation actually could create more jobs, one,
Yes.
or I can reskill my team members and make sure that they are relevant for the future. I mean, think about we're in the fourth industrial revolution now, right? Industrialization was the same thing, right? Steam engines and so forth. Oh well, are they going to replace people?
More jobs created.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if you think
When Henry
about
Ford built the
exactly,
first car.
and the T-model cars and so forth, when you start building out, the assembly line, is that going to replace people? Well, no, you just have to reskill people
Reskill,
so that
retool.
they become relevant and remain relevant. But if the unions think about it that way versus really just pushing back on evolution, you can now think about it as well. Okay, this is what is going to happen. This digital transformation is happening, whether we like it or not. How do we now ensure that our members
Already.
are retooled and ready for
Yes.
that? And
Yes.
that
Yes.
that
Agreed.
shift in mindset will go a long way when you're on the bargaining table and actually do the negotiations.
Yeah.
But if you think about it though, is you keeping on your own people.
Yeah.
Why
exactly.
would you want someone who has a mind to continuously, repetitively fill out forms? Because that's what
True.
you're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah,
True.
You're
yeah.
saying that you prefer that your
Yes.
people who you are the union leader looking for them to better themselves. I want to believe it's just numbers, but to better themselves. Why would you want people to fill out forms when instead they could look at the output, analyze it, and add value?
Yeah.
So
Right. Well, I think this was a really good conversation, rich conversation, very varied perspective. Maria, you really have me thinking now, because if you asked me before this conversation, I was dead on work from home all the time. But based on all the different perspectives, I think I've really swayed.
Yes.
And I'm now middle of the road and you're seeing the pros and the cons on both sides. But thank you all for coming and being part of Academy Business Conversations. And I look forward to having you all at future episodes as we explore different topics. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.